Hello, Rec187, and welcome back to Ultimate General American Revolution, where we're going to be continuing our campaign as the Americans. Now, first off, I have to point out that you should ignore the idiot in the corner. He's going to be appearing frequently in this episode, and you won't be able to hear a word of what he's saying. And that's because he failed to register. Our recording software had switched from the boom mic that you can see in the picture there to the integrated camera mic. And ruined an hour and a half worth of recordings, which is, awesome fun. And not only did it ruin it because you can't pick up the voiceover that I'm doing, it's just enough mumbly word voices where you can't use the background game audio either. So fun times. It's forcing me to do the one thing I really dread as a content creator, which is video editing. So fun times all around. But don't worry, I'm not about to try and do some kind of secondary voiceover of an hour and a half worth of footage. Instead, we're going to condense it down. I'm going to touch upon the key events, decisions, battles, etc. that happened during this playthrough so that we kind of keep caught up with the story. I'm not proposing to go back and redo it either. So as we rejoin the strategic situation, we are of course trying to relieve ourselves of a British incursion, having taken Bennington and Kingston and Fort Rice. So our focus is going to be on liberating those. We've massed a force under our General Requin with I think it's something like 300 regulars and a bunch of militia in Albany, and there was a force under Benedict Arnold of about 1,000 militia, I think. Just south of Kingston as well. So we're going to be pushing those through. So first thing we do is that a force under General Requin is going to take care of about 600 English militia who are lurking outside of Albany. So we'll jump ahead just before the battle lines meet. As I said, we do outnumber them. They are only militia, so this is not really too much of a test for our troops, albeit we don't have that many regulars ourselves. Tactics here were fairly straightforward in terms of use our superior numbers to envelop them and get on their flanks. And if we're really lucky, getting behind them, where I was trying to push that unit there, but as you can see, not successfully. The intent there being not only do we want to defeat them and break them and make them run, but ideally we can capture some prisoners as well. Obviously having the double benefit of taking them off the campaign as a whole and allowing us to use them as bargaining chips for money, resources, our own prisoners, as prisoner exchanges can go. Not that I've lent on that mechanic too heavily thus far. They did come out quite aggressively, so credit to them, charging our regulars with one of their militia units there. As expected, that went terribly badly for them. And indeed, the whole force is going to break and run pretty quickly. Yeah, there they go. So bit of a non-event for the first battle. As expected, managed to beat them, and we did get one of them to surrender, which was positive, so we did take one of their units off the field. The butcher's bill on the field was 18 dead and wounded for ourselves, 200 dead, wounded and captured for the British, and more importantly they will also take more attrition through kind of rearguard actions as we chase them on the campaign map. Back on the campaign map, we do make an effort to pursue, as you can see, chasing them initially south before they break across the river and ultimately do escape north to Bennington. I think we managed to inflict a few more losses on them, but nothing too significant. But yeah, a good little stepping stone to starting to erode their forces. Next up, we'll have the militia under Benedict Arnold is going to try and relieve Kingston. Again, we've got about 1,000 militia under our control against about 380, I think it is, British regulars. So not a slam dunk, but I think this time we can make our numbers tell, although we just have men with guns, no cannons, no light infantry, nothing that fancy, whereas the Brits do have that advantage. Once again, we'll rejoin the action just as the two battle lines start to run into each other. Again, nothing particularly complex about our tactics here, given all we've got is big blocks of infantry. We kind of try and move to flank the English positions, make our numbers count. We know we're up against better equipped and better trained troops, but there is really not many of them. The other disadvantage the Brits do have is there was an objective, as you can see just off to the top left of the screen there, and so they broke off essentially a third of their army almost, to go and capture that, which will take time for them to become involved in the engagement. That gives us time to kind of wrap around on the right, expose the flank of that first unit, and ultimately we're going to then try and roll up the entire British lines. And it's not long before the entire British force collapses. First, the light infantry decide they've taken enough casualties and flee the field, and then the British regulars on their left flank, in a really untenable position, decide they've had enough bloodshed and make a break for it as well. We obviously quickly follow up, and after that the whole army decides, sod this for a game of soldiers, and they're going to quit the field. The casualties here were much more even, about 50 dead and wounded on each side, but of course we will be able to inflict more losses as they fight a rearguard action. And also, if you think about where they are in a strategic position on the map, we should be able to isolate the force and finish them off entirely. And back on the campaign map, you can see Burrows trying to make good his escape there. We do bring down a couple of units from Requin Valois' force to try and block him off, but ultimately, unfortunately, he does escape east over the mountains. However, we do take a slight interlude here to update some of our trading mechanics. So we finally, and rather sensibly, use the market ability to have automated buy and sell orders. So we set up an order to continually buy sugar, so we always have at least 5 units kicking about. I'll say this: A, saves me doing it manually and, managing to forget to do it. And we'll make sure there's always enough sugar on hand to feed the distillery we've got. And we also set up an order to automatically sell rum. So again, we're now actually using that bit properly, using our distillery to start to generate a little bit of cash for us. Not so much in the rest of this episode, but when we get on to the following couple, we do a lot more in terms of trying to beef up our economy and get to this kind of trade and production flowing a little bit better. But this is where we actually start to make baby sips. Only, about 16 episodes in? No one said I was a quick learner. Back to the campaign side of things. Next thing we're going to do is obviously liberate Kingston. Now there's no English troops in it. We'll then gather all our forces in and around Albany, give them a little bit of chance to rest and recuperate, and then also make a push in on Bennington, where, as you can see, there are 1,600 redcoats still waiting for us. And ultimately, we've got a force of about 2,600 under Requiem Valois to take on the 1,800 redcoats in Bennington, although it is worth noting only about 300 of our force are regulars. We are heavily relying on militia for this, albeit militia with a reasonable amount of experience. And the other advantage we have here is, of course, a third of the British force is also militia, which helps even things out a bit. So we're definitely up against it in terms of regulars, but as ever, we're really hoping we can make the numbers count. And ideally, if we can, either on the battle or on the map afterwards, really try and surround some of these units to force surrenders. But we'll have to win the fight before we worry about that. So as we join this one, the first thing to note is actually the deployment distance between two armies was almost nothing, so there's going to be very little room to manoeuvre before the engagement starts. Also noting that I hadn't managed condition particularly well of all my units, and so some of my militia guys started pretty much exhausted, and indeed one of their sub-units of artillery gave up the ghost almost immediately before even doing anything. So a bit frustrating, but also my fault, so it is what it is. Game plan as we start the battle, fairly straightforward. The intent is to make the most of the terrain features immediately in front of us, so get some militia into the tree line, supported by an artillery unit on their left, and then really to try and, extend and use our numbers as best we can to get that kind of traditional cauldron shape that we try and get, to expose some flanks and then roll up the British lines. There is a lot of them. It's definitely a bit more of a chew. And you saw it flash up there. I do have a lot of troops that are pretty tired, so we're going to have to manage that as well. We're not really too heavily focused on securing objectives at the moment. The intent really is to try and inflict casualties upon the British. That is one advantage we have over the AI. You can just see the top right there, where there's one of the map objectives that we can gloriously ignore and then know that they will send off a force to deal with, which at least kind of detracts from their main battle line for just now. So the next thing we're trying to do here is just set up our lines, get our cannons to work, firing shot and shell, and I don't think we get into canister range just yet, but fire what we can into them and see if we can't start to break some of our units. Fairly quickly, this battle becomes one of two flanks. First, on our left flank, one of the British regular units does break and run, albeit they were kind of small and weakened unit, but nice to get them off the field early nonetheless. And as you can see, we're bringing up our reinforcements here to try and exploit the space we have on our left flank to try and roll them up towards that central farmhouse. However, on our right flank, one of our militia units in the kind of centre right, they break and run pretty early, to be honest. They've not taken too many losses, although we know the militia morale is fragile. We have some replacements on hand, so we backfill that with another militia unit. although they are also pretty exhausted, and we know they may not hold for long. So we reroute one of the few regular units we have around to provide ourselves a little bit more reserves. So very quickly we get the feeling that it's going to be, can we break the British right quicker than our right starts to collapse and fall back. So we do everything we can to try and exploit that. Luckily, with them kind of lingering around the farm, they're not really using the units to the full extent by getting a nice coherent line. And also it's providing a good target-rich environment for us to prioritise with our cannonry, which is really going to continue to weaken the left flank of the British there. As you can see, that backup unit we'd put into the line breaks super quickly as well. Again, they were tired when they brought in. I hadn't given them enough rest. But I'll take that on. But thankfully, our big push on the left is also working. So this kind of army is going through a fairly classic kind of turning maneuver as both flanks try to break each other. Recognising the danger on our right flank and the fact that our militia units were now fighting British units in cover, I give the orders for them to fall back. Meanwhile, I bring the regulars we were bringing over as reinforcement and get them to set up a position to start to refuse that right flank to stop the British enveloping us. It works relatively well, although the fallback of the two militia units isn't necessarily the direction I wanted, as we do kind of expand the battlefield and end up out in the open, although it ends up being not too bad a position, because if the Brits want to continue to engage us, they've got to kind of A, divert some forces away from the main battle line, and B, fight us out in the open, but it is now tying up a couple of those units. Meanwhile, progress on the left flank continues well, although the Brits have kind of pulled their act together and refused their own flank. But as you can see by the numbers, many of the units have already broken and fled, and that allows us to really start to push in on the kind of centre left of their position and hopefully try and break that before swinging around on the rest. Our super reinforcements, which we sent to refuse the right flank, almost immediately break and run, so starting to see a little bit of concern there as we continue to commit to this kind of wheeling motions as the two armies harass each other's flanks, but thankfully some of the militia units which weren't so much up for the fight early on have rallied, and we can bring them back in to plug that gap on our right flank as we continue to do good work on the left. The battle continues in this vein for some time until eventually the unit at the apex of the British lines that was holding that farmhouse breaks and runs. I then decided to try and advance a militia unit into the farmhouse and use the cover of the buildings. Yes, some advantages, and certainly in terms of cover, but also they'd be facing enemies in multiple directions, so maybe not a great idea. As you can see there, we start to flirt with disaster as the final militia unit holding the kind of centre right to the right of artillery unit break and run and really start exposing us, one, to losing artillery, and then two, to getting rolled up along that line. We do have these kind of units still fighting out in the loose, which is at least giving the British pause for thought in terms of we can't completely come around and flank that position, and I think that buys us enough hesitation in the British lines to really to pull our regulars back over into the wood line and to hold position. Meanwhile, the left is still looking pretty solid, so even though we're pushing against with just militia and against some regulars, they are doing fine. It doesn't take long before things start to unravel pretty seriously. Our last big unit of regulars, they break and run after having moved them in to secure the flank, that tree line becoming a bit of a dreaded position. Shortly followed thereafter, the militia unit we'd perhaps ill-advised advance towards that farm. They do break and run as well and head back to our lines. So we're left a little bit in a kind of scrabbling defence here to try and hold off those British units pushing our centre. We do get some relief, and there you can see that one of the British units shatter, and the ones that are on the field are pretty small, so we may be able to kind of try and get them to break and run or disintegrate and start to kind of whittle away their forces that way. But it's not a great day for us at the minute. Really quite concerned with how they're going to end up. Units on the left still holding strong, although we start to see some issues with low ammo, and which is going to impact our rate of fire, and then obviously, of course, the progress we're then making. We do manage to steady our lines with those militia units which had initially shown some shaky morale, coming back into the fight and really managing to hold the British, although not fighting from the most advantageous position, standing in the open, and indeed the cannonry holding firm despite the onrushing British infantry. But yeah, great blasts of canister there to well, not only kill many, but cause some serious morale damage. As you can see on my left flank here, the Brits have essentially disintegrated, and that allows us to free up this big chunky militia unit, albeit one with no ammo, to start and put a significant amount of pressure on our centre and use our smaller units just to drive a wedge in. And just like that, the British decide they've had enough. This, I think, was a close run thing. Probably made much closer by the fact I didn't amply rest all the units before we started the fight, which I know I'd rested some of them, but really should have given them a bit more time. Also could have done with a little bit more supply, but we'll address that going forward. In the end, it was a pretty fantastic victory. You can see we grab a little bit of prisoners, not many, so we'll have to try and mop up everything else that we can on the global map. At the end of the day, casualties were actually much better than it felt playing through at the time. We only lost about 550 infantry units. The British managed to lose 1,000. Like I said, I think the biggest issue we had in that battle was, fatigue and morale, with units breaking and running rather than necessarily dying. And again, part of that I think was just managing the troops poorly before the engagement of the battle. Now back on the global map, actually things get a lot better, as you can see by those little flashes of orange, and actually all the remaining British troops surrender. So what had been 1,000 British casualties to 550 of our own suddenly became 1,800 British casualties to 550 of our own. So what was actually, at the time, a fairly sketchy battle in terms of how it was fighting ends up being a pretty fantastic victory because the retreating forces had nowhere to go. So really pleased with the outcome. Our army's in a pretty poor state now, so definitely needs a little bit of R&R. So as we go forward, we're going to capture Bennington, we're going to move some people around to get ammo, to get provisions, to get reinforcements, and then we're going to gather ourselves a force and go and move in on Fort Rice. As we jump back in, a week has passed and we're now on to January the 16th of 1776. We've mainly been spending that time letting our troops rest and recover in our heartland around New Haven and Hartford. We did actually have to go and expand one of our regular units as they'd lost some of their sub-units. However, we have managed to pull together about 3,500 troops, and we've also noticed there are only 571 Brits at Fort Rice, so it's going to allow us to push in and take them on with, great expectations of success. In the interim, there was a couple of things. First, we did start to expand our logistics infrastructure around New Haven and around Hatfield, recognising we're starting to do a lot of shuffling of troops north and south at the minute, something which is going to continue for a few episodes. I thought it'd be advantageous to improve the kind of infrastructure, not only for more provisions and more ammunition to flow, but also so we can actually march faster along the roads. We did also have a naval engagement, which was entirely lackluster and nothing eventful happened. I'm kind of not super engaged with the naval aspect of this game thus far. Maybe just we've not got to the interesting bits with interesting ships yet, but either it seems to be the AI runs away from me, or I think once I ran away from the AI, nothing much happened. So letting the AI manage those fights for a minute and concentrating on the land side. And on the land side, as you can see, as we push in towards Fort Rice, the British just break and run. They say, I'm not sure I fancy that, and just head back over the hills from whence they came, which is actually a huge victory without battle, because Fort Rice is a critical junction in our supply network. So everything that's based or coming from our core land in the south, so New Haven, Hartford, and the port I've forgotten the name of, all flows through Fort Rice before it goes to the Hudson Valley or up into Canada. So when the British held that position, all our positions there, all our troops, they weren't getting any additional provisions, weren't getting additional supplies. So that was absolutely critical. Securing Hubbardton is not as critical because it's just a secondary route, but would be advantageous to keep keeping the spice flowing, as you can see. Now we're doing a little bit of scouting here, and we've noticed actually around Fort Stephen there's only 1,200 men, and we have 3,500 available. In Hubbardton there's only 600 men. So we're starting to say, well, actually our initial objective of the campaign was liberation, or our lost territories in terms of Bennington, Fort Rice, Hubbardton, but with so few Brits hanging around the place, we've now changed our plans. Say, hang on, given how critical a junction Fort Rice is, not only do we want to hold and secure it, but actually this might be the time to strike east, take Fort Lovell, take Fort Stephen, and then we've got a kind of a front line away from our key supply line, where we can actually afford to lose the position and still be fine. And so that's what we now decide to do. So first up, we're going to secure our rear, and we're going to take out Hubbardton. Now the Brits here completely play into our hand by sending a detachment of 600 men north. But unfortunately, before we can engage them, decide, oh, that's a terrible idea, and pull them back down towards Fort Stephen. But it's going to allow us to essentially defeat the Brits in detail. So first off, we're going to take 2,700 men under Requiem Valois here, and go kick some British butt with the 600 gents in Hubbardton. This battle, complete non-event. Before we even see the British, they break and run. So as you can see from the results, we head back to the global map without any casualties on either side. However, no casualties in battle doesn't mean no casualties at all, and you can see the Brits start to take some fairly significant losses as they try and retreat back east towards Fort Lovell. Meanwhile, it allows our regular units to come in and secure Hubbardton itself. So we end up losing, I think, a couple of hundred before they make a clear break for it. Maybe only the 150. But either way, I was right the first time. We do lose a couple hundred. So much weakened, really no cost to ourselves. Another good victory. And now we're facing positions of about 1,000 redcoats in Fort Lovell, and I think it's about 1,500 in Fort Stevens. Or actually, it's less than that. It's only 1,250 in Fort Stevens, and we still have a force of somewhere near 2,500-3,000, depending if we pull in some less units. So really sensing the opportunity is ripe for us to strike those forts and really kind of expand our holdings. And that's exactly what we do. So we are only 1 day later, and we're pushing in on Fort Lovell. Our hope is, obviously, the 300 odd Brits that have retreated from Hubbardton aren't really in a condition to fight. And we'll be able to kind of just roll them up pretty quickly. If we do make the decision to sally forth, again, behavior we've seen from AI quite common, which will allow us to actually engage and destroy a portion of their forces in front of the fort before we actually get to it. And I don't know if you might have seen quickly there, actually, 2/3 of their force are militia as well, which then gives us even more confident about being able to give them a good old trouncing and secure the fort for ourselves. Aside from some light infantry we encountered moving towards the fort, the Brits have mainly concentrated in and around the defences, which makes sense, although they have a complete lack of artillery, so we're taking our time here to bring up our own guns and really starting to blast away. We do have one battery on the kind of west side of the fort as you're looking at it there, but we do have the advantage in artillery, so the intention is to use that before we move in with our troops. As we've done before with the kind of units the Brits have standing out in front of the fort, we will kind of concentrate on those and try and kind of break them individually, and then see what the AI feeds into our churning mill before ultimately kind of storming the fort if need be. As you can see, we're starting to get into our kind of fighting position now. We've got a couple of big blocks of pretty experienced regulars at this point, engaging those 3 units standing out at the front, and we're even bringing in some of our militia on the flank to engage their militia in open. Again, ideally using a bit of cover to our advantage. We did bring up some guns that had been lagging in the rear, and as you can see, those units at the front already starting to break under the withering fire which we're putting upon us. Having broke most of the forces on the outside of the forts, beyond the 2 militia units at the back there, it's starting to sense a little bit of an opportunity here to actually kind of surround the fort and cut off any escape routes. And as you can see, I'm pulling 2 of our militia units on quite a kind of wide path there to get ourselves positioned to block off any kind of northern escape. Similarly, and move this militia unit around and on our left-hand side to hopefully surround them, because what we have seen before is towards the end of the battle, when you do see the fort units break and run, and if there isn't an avenue of escape, we obviously take it. So trying to move some troops near to cut it off as early as possible, and thereby when my units, inevitably succumb to our onslaught, all they can do is run towards our happy chappies and offer themselves up in surrender. So they are. We haven't really been pushing the main thrust towards the south. We've been kind of almost letting that be while we let our units reposition around. And as you can see here, we're just about completing our kind of blockade of the fort. And that's the kind of signal for us to then move in our crack troops and send them all running. to be honest, just the kind of attritional fight thus far has got the English really on the edge, and it won't take long before the entirety of the army breaks and runs. Credit to them is their artillery still plucking away at us from that left flank. It's not been too effectual. It has been one of the issues in terms of fort combat, and we've seen it on our own side as well, where some of the units are actually firing into the bank. So we'll count ourselves lucky there, but we didn't have to withstand too much artillery fire as we enacted our great snare. You can see, unfortunately, one of our militia units, as militia tend to do, decides they've had enough of a fight and offer an escape route, but we very quickly moved to close that. And then this is where we really see that strategy pay off, and you'll see the notifications start to ping, ping, ping on the left-hand side as all the all the British units break, run, realise they are surrounded, and surrender. And in fact, we capture, I think, every unit that was on the field when they decided to have enough, which was, really good outcome, and really, really pleased that we managed to kind of inflict this big a loss, and they can't just pull the units back to face us another day. And there we have it, a pretty resounding victory, 250-ish losses on our side, inflicting 800 casualties, which is positive, but capturing another 750, which is huge. That was a really, really satisfying battle. 1,500 dead, wounded, captured for a cost of 250 is great. Not only that, but when you're assaulting a fort. So really pleased with how that panned out. And the intention, of course, is just to take our force almost immediately south and see if we can't do the same again on Fort Stevens, and secure ourselves a new front line. So 3 days later, we do turn our almost entire force south, minus some garrison we've left at Fort Lovell. But to supplement that, we've brought in some supporting militia units that were in Fort Rice and in Leicester, and Benedict Arnold again to kind of engage the fort. The English did sally out to meet us, which actually provided some interesting consequences, because as you can see as I'm flicking here, they ended up kind of moving the battle map so that not all my units were going to be in the fight at any one time, but whichever way we looked at it, all the British were going to be involved. So that was entirely kind of a consequence rather than a deliberate act on their part, but was frustratingly well played by the AI. Ultimately, though, we still massively outnumber them, even if we don't have all our militia units involved. We're still rocking there, say 2,500 against 1,300, half of which are militia units. So either way, this should go pretty well in our favour. As we're manoeuvring in towards the fort in this one, for some reason, the Brits decided to send a light infantry unit and an artillery unit out to meet us. Fairly obviously, they both had a pretty bad day. We kind of chase away the light infantry pretty quickly. They're more of a nuisance than anything else. And we take the yes, thank you to a juicy artillery unit, which we can knock out very quickly and just increase our artillery advantage when it comes to taking the fort itself. Up at the fort, it becomes a bit of a rinse and repeat of the heroics of several days ago. This time, though, I don't think they have any artillery with which to respond. So as a kind of preparations for bringing our troops in, we just line up the 3 units of cannons that we have and let them rip to start to inflict some casualties. We are in shot range rather than canister range, so not quite as effective, but we are obviously still out of musket range of the Brits, so that's positive as it can get. While the cannons start some of their deadly work, we will kind of shuffle our units around to start building that snare that we used last time to try and make sure not only do we break the Brits, take the fort, but we also take as many prisoners as we can. And as the battle develops, we have them penned in on 3 sides here. You can't quite see, but there's a unit off to the north as well. However, on our kind of left here, those frustrating few light infantry units that are left on the British side are harassing our blocking force and preventing us from fully sealing the gap, so we're kind of having to hold off. One of the prizes I really want to get here actually is not only obviously capture as many units as we can, but to take gauge as well. Now you can see here finally that light infantry unit shatter, and that allows us to bring this division over here and seal off the gap and really lock the English into their fate. I think Gage tries to take a run for it at this point, which of course we make many disparaging remarks about, despite the fact that we did exactly the same thing with Benedict Arnold when Fort Rice fell. but this time obviously we're definitely in the right on both occasions because that's how it works. Unfortunately, I think he does get away, so we'll have to try and corner him on the global map because we've not managed to do it here. From then on out, it simply becomes a matter of closing the noose. We just move in from all sides. Their units, we have them for numbers and quality because of a big degree of militia in their army as well, and they just kind of get whittled down, break, run, and inevitably surrender. And once again, we manage to hoover up, I think, all of the units. I can't remember if that little unit down the bottom right there escapes. Maybe it does, but everyone else surrenders, which is another pretty good day at the office. So the final bill comes in, 240 of our dead for another 700 of theirs, and on top of 450 prisoners. That little campaign to take those forts has been phenomenally successful, was really satisfying to play through at the time, and has put us in a really good position as far as the campaign and map as a whole is concerned. Back of the global map, you can see unfortunately Gage does make an escape off to the east and rejoins the British forces in Portsmouth. But we won't let that dampen our great success of the last campaign in seizing these forts, and we now start to issue orders to move around the army. We're getting our militia units to start garrisoning the 3 forts we've secured, and we're getting ready to send the regulars under Requiem back up to Canada to position ourselves in 3 Rivers to start the push on towards Quebec. As we take the time to resupply our forces and move them in position for our Canadian campaign, a few things of note occur. The first and most important, actually, is the completion of the reorganization tech. Now, that doesn't do much, but it does allow us to work on the Continental Army reforms, and this is a big one. This one will allow us to build our own professional troops. So at the minute, all we can do is build militia, which is really kind of limiting the effectiveness of our forces. So 57 days, and then we can recruit our own regulars. So that's a key tech we'll be looking on as we head to the next one. Next up, we do continue our building campaign, and we start expanding the infrastructure in and around Fort Rice. So again, trying to build this kind of corridor north to really facilitate our troop movement, as well as the logistics supported by that. Thirdly, we continue working on our diplomatic angle and our decision to really try and bring everyone on board, including working all the natives. And so we use our kind of action this turn, if you will, or this timer to start a trade agreement with the Miamis that will start pulling them in our direction and lowering some of those tensions. And the final thing of note was an interesting event around enlistment of enslaved populace. So we had a choice here to either take on enslaved soldiers, which will give us a larger recruitment pool, of course, but actually incur some sabotage, or we could say, no, we're not going to enlist enslaved individuals. This one, we went down the good old freedom route and said that anyone is welcome in our army. So it did take us a little bit while to finish manoeuvring all our soldiers around the place, and in fact we ran on until February the 14th before we had everyone fully garrisoned at 3 Rivers, and we have about 5,000 troops under Requiem ready to try and push on towards Quebec, which we will attempt, he says foreshadowingly, to do in the next episode. And that will kind of draw us to a close here. So again, apologies for this one has turned out. Hopefully it's not been too much of a pain. I've kind of distilled it down to enough critical events to keep it interesting without being too weighed down with the fact it's just my droll voice for company. As ever, thanks very much for watching. I hope you catch you in the next one. Which I can guarantee has proper sound balance. See you then. Cheerio.